Welcome to South African Freedom Fighters, personal stories of struggle, justice, and memory. The podcast where we bring to life the powerful and often challenging stories of those who risked everything to reshape South Africa. In each episode, we dive into the lives of the icons who stood at the forefront of the anti-apartheid movement, exploring the moments that defined them and the legacies they left behind. Today we'll embark on a journey through the lives of two of South Africa's most influential figures, Nelson and Winnie Mandela. Together, and even in their own ways apart, they became symbols of the fight against apartheid. Their partnership, resilience, and sacrifice serve as a testament to the price of freedom and the challenges of leadership.
This podcast isn't just about history, it's about humanity. These are the stories of individuals who, against overwhelming odds, reshape not just their own lives, but the destiny of a nation. Their sacrifices remind us that every struggle for freedom has its cost, and every victory has its complexities. Let's honor these lessons as we journey through South Africa's past.
Your hosts for the podcast are Emmanuel, Solomon, Nora, Margot, and Lance.
To appreciate the significance of Nelson and Winnie Mandela's contributions, let's first set the scene. South Africa in the early 20th century was a land divided by racial segregation and inequality. The apartheid regime wasn't just a system of laws. It was a way of life imposed upon millions, dictating every aspect of existence based on race. Black South Africans were restricted to poor, overcrowded townships, forced into the most menial jobs, and systematically stripped of their dignity and rights. The apartheid government controlled not only where people could work or live, but also whom they could love and marry, how they could move about, and even what education they could receive. Apartheid was an institution built on fear and repression, and maintaining it required brutal enforcement. From violent crackdowns on peaceful protests to police raids on black communities, the government used every tool at its disposal to keep people compliant and afraid. But where there was oppression, there was also defiance. The African National Congress, or ANC, was one of the many groups organizing to fight back against the system, aiming to create a South Africa where all people could live freely and equally.
Life under apartheid wasn't just defined by big, obvious injustices. It was the small, relentless humiliations that eroded people's spirits. Being forced to step off sidewalks for white pedestrians, carrying passbooks everywhere to justify your presence, and facing daily verbal abuse. All of these indignities compounded to create an unbearable existence. For many, resistance was not a choice, it was survival. Nelson Mandela was born in 1918 in a small village called Mvezo in the Eastern Cape. Raised in the rural heart of South Africa, he grew up steeped in the Thembu traditions with a strong sense of justice instilled by his guardian, Chief Jungentaba. Although South Africa was under colonial rule, Mandela's early life in the Thembu nation exposed him to the values of leadership and responsibility, experiences that shaped his understanding of justice. When Mandela eventually moved back to Johannesburg, he saw firsthand the stark inequalities between black and white South Africans. It was here that Mandela began his legal studies, becoming one of the few black South Africans to practice law in apartheid South Africa. His work as a lawyer showed him just how severely apartheid laws stripped his people of any meaningful rights. Frustrated by the slow pace of legal and peaceful protests, he joined the African National Congress in 1944, aligning himself with young radical voices who wanted more direct action. One of Mandela's earliest challenges was balancing his growing political activism with his personal ambitions. At times, the pull of his responsibilities as a husband and father clashed with his commitment to the cause. Yet, Mandela's vision for a united and equitable South Africa kept him steadfast, even as it became clear that his fight would demand immense personal sacrifices. In the 1950s, Mandela's leadership with the ANC helped ignite the Defiance Campaign, a nationwide movement of mass resistance. But as apartheid repression grew more violent, Mandela's tactics shifted.
Never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another.
In 1961, he co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spirit of the nation, an armed wing of the ANC. This was a controversial decision, but Mandela believed that nonviolent resistance alone was not enough to dismantle apartheid. His conviction and his willingness to risk everything ultimately led to his 1962 arrest and his life sentence in 1964. Even as he faced possible death at his trial, Mandela's defiant words became legendary. "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live and see realized, but my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." These words will resonate globally, marking Mandela as not just a South African hero, but a symbol of justice and equality worldwide.
Even behind bars, Mandela's influence only grew. Robben Island, the infamous prison where he spent 18 of his 27 years, became a microcosm of resistance. Mandela and his fellow inmates organized classes, discussed political strategy, and maintained hope, transforming the prison into what they called the University of Robben Island. His unwavering spirit inspired countless South Africans to keep the struggle alive. While Nelson was behind bars, another figure emerged as the face of the anti-apartheid struggle: his wife, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, born in 1936. Winnie grew up in a rural area herself, witnessing the harsh realities of racial segregation. A passionate activist in her own right, Winnie trained as a social worker, where she encountered poverty and despair daily in the townships. This fueled her desire for change. Winnie Mandela was fiercely independent and possessed an unbreakable spirit. She didn't want to just be a passive supporter of her husband's struggle. She wanted to be in the heart of the resistance. And that's exactly where she ended up. In Soweto, Winnie rallied young people, organized protests, and became known as the mother of the nation. Her influence was undeniable, but her activism came at a high price. She endured years of harassment, multiple imprisonments, house arrest, and even banishment to a remote town called Brantford, where she was cut off from her family and friends. Despite the physical and emotional toll of the anti-apartheid struggle, Winnie Mandela became a symbol of undying resistance. Winnie's activism brought her into close contact with the youth movements of the time, particularly in Soweto. She worked tirelessly to inspire a generation of young activists, emphasizing that their voices and actions were essential to dismantling apartheid. Her charisma and determination earned her admiration, even as the apartheid regime sought to silence her. While in exile in Brantford, Winnie integrated herself into the community and continued to organize. When her banishment ended, she returned to Soweto and continued her work, as the threat from the apartheid government continued to loom large. Here, in 1986, she founded the Mandela United Football Club, initially a security retinue. It quickly evolved into a paramilitary organization and began enacting justice against suspected informants for the government, usually in the form of kidnappings, beatings, and even murders. Due to her connection in the Mandela United Football Club, the United Democratic Front, a prominent anti-apartheid umbrella organization, disavowed her, while the club would officially dissolve after the intervention by the African National Congress and Nelson himself. Despite her isolation, Winnie found ways to resist. She smuggled messages to fellow activists, coordinated protests from afar, and used her role as a community worker to keep the spirit of the resistance alive. These efforts made her a formidable opponent in the eyes of the apartheid government, which continued to monitor and harass her at every turn.
Winnie Mandela has carried a complex legacy. Her support for armed resistance and the fallout of the Mandela United Football Club cast a shadow on her public image. Winnie Mandela's commitment to the freedom struggle, however, cannot be denied, and she remains a figure of intense pride for many in South Africa who spent years on the ground agitating and organizing for their freedom. The Mandela's relationship was marked by intense love, dedication, and an equally profound strain. Nelson spent 27 years in prison, separated from Winnie and his children. While he was revered as the face of the anti-apartheid movement, Winnie became its beating heart on the outside, even as she wrestled with the pressure of leadership. By the time Nelson was released in 1990, the years of separation, trauma, and their distinct paths in the struggle had created a rift. their marriage ultimately couldn't withstand the weight of their respective battles. Their personal struggles mirrored the challenges of building a post-apartheid South Africa, a country striving for reconciliation while grappling with unresolved traumas. Nelson's focus on unity often clashed with the demands of those who sought more immediate action. Winnie's fierce advocacy for the marginalized highlighted the tensions between healing and accountability.
But their contributions to South Africa's freedom and equality continue to shape the nation's identity. Nelson's legacy is celebrated as one of forgiveness, negotiation, and peace, while Winnie is remembered as a voice for the voiceless, fiercely unafraid to stand up to those in power. Winnie's legacy, however, has remained complicated and polarizing. To her supporters, she is a hero of the anti-apartheid movement and the mother of her nation, who defied the expectations placed upon her as a black woman in a racially segregated society. While to her detractors, she is seen as a tyrant and murderer, marred by the excesses of the Mandela United Football Club. While Nelson has become lionized globally as a symbol of peace and reconciliation, Winnie's story is one marked by the moral complexities of an active revolutionary struggle. Together, Nelson and Winnie Mandela represent two essential aspects of the freedom struggle: the diplomacy required to build a nation and the fiery resilience needed to keep fighting when all hope seems lost. As we reflect on the lives of Nelson and Winnie Mandela, it's important to recognize the personal costs that come with fighting for justice. For Nelson, 27 years behind bars was not just a sacrifice of his own freedom, but also a separation from his children and community. During those years, he was forced to watch from a distance as his country spiraled deeper into the grip of apartheid. While he was a symbol of hope and resistance on the outside, the emotional toll of his imprisonment weighed heavily on him. His determination to never lose hope, despite the cruelty and isolation, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. For Winnie, the cost was also personal, enduring years of imprisonment, harassment, banishment, as well as the emotional strain of being a leader in the movement while her husband was incarcerated. She was forced to navigate the complexities of motherhood, leadership, and sacrifice, often alone. Her strength in this role was undeniably crucial to keeping the fight alive, but it also came at a high personal price. The legacies of Nelson and Winnie Mandela also serve as a reminder that the struggle for freedom and equality is ongoing. South Africa's transition to democracy in the 1990s was a monumental achievement, but it did not mark the end of the fight against systemic inequality. Nelson's efforts in the post-apartheid era to foster reconciliation were important, but the challenges of rebuilding a nation torn apart by decades of division and violence remained. Winnie's legacy, especially her unrelenting advocacy for the marginalized, speaks to the ongoing need for social justice and accountability. Their stories remind us that activism is not a linear path. Progress is often messy, full of contradictions and painful decisions. The quest for a truly equal society requires not just political and economic change, but a deep reckoning with the social and cultural wounds that persist. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the lives of Nelson and Winnie Mandela, two people whose contributions resonate not just in South Africa, but worldwide. Next time, we'll be exploring the legacy of Steve Biko, a figure whose words and ideas sparked a movement that changed the course of history. Until then, let's remember that freedom is never free. It's built on the sacrifices, complexities, and courage of those who dare to resist oppression, even in the face of impossible odds. The stories of Nelson and Winnie Mandela remind us that heroes are not perfect. They are human, flawed, courageous, and shaped by the tumult of their times. Their journeys encourage us to reflect not only on the cost of freedom, but on our own capacity to contribute to a more just world.